Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming out on this rainy day to hear this presentation on the women founders and the history of the Milwaukee Soldiers Home. Our story begins in 1862 when a group of prominent Milwaukee women founded the West Side Soldiers Aid Society. Ladies' Aid Societies or Soldiers' Aid Societies were organizations of women formed during the Civil War that were dedicated to providing supplies to soldiers on the battlefield and caring for sick and wounded soldiers. Over the course of the war, between 7,000 and 20,000 Ladies' Aid Societies were established in both the North and the South. From its inception, the West Side's main focus was making sure that everything humanely possible should be done for soldiers at home as well as for those in the field. In early 1864, the Wisconsin Soldiers Home Association was formed by a coalition of women's charitable organizations led by Lydia Hewitt, Fanny Buttrick, Martha Reed Mitchell, and Hannah Vetter, all members of the West Side Soldiers Aid Society. The women began their work immediately and with enthusiasm. Large rooms on what was then West Water Street and is now Plankington Avenue in downtown Milwaukee were rented and arrangements were made for receiving sick and wounded soldiers. They were supported by the goodwill of the people of Milwaukee, and the state of Wisconsin granted the home a charter together with an appropriation of $5,000. In their first year alone, nearly 3,000 men were cared for, and 2,000 men passing through Milwaukee were fed at camps and depots, making a total of nearly 5,000 soldiers who were helped by the association. 406 soldiers received surgical or medical treatment, and a brief and refreshing rest was made available to sick, wounded, and worn-out soldiers. Even the funeral expenses of the soldiers who died while at the home were paid, and remains were usually shipped home. Those whose bodies could not be shipped home went to honored graves at the beautiful Forest Home Cemetery on Milwaukee's south side, followed to the last by some of the ladies. During the entire period of its activity, from April 1864 to July 1866, the Wisconsin Soldiers Home sheltered 31,650 soldiers, of more than 1,000 receiving medical care, and of that number, only 28 died. From the very beginning, the goal of the Wisconsin Soldiers Home Association was the establishment of a permanent asylum or home for disabled soldiers. To raise the substantial funds necessary, the women decided that a great soldiers' home fair would be the best way to raise the money needed, and planning began. They had the full support of Governor James Lewis, who, in April 1865, issued a proclamation urging the citizens of Wisconsin to support the endeavor, stating, "I would recommend this enterprise to the people as worthy of their aid and support, and trust that they will, by their attendance and by contributing liberally of their means, which have been protected by the soldiers, to make the fair a success and thus add to soldiers' comfort." While this proclamation undoubtedly had an effect upon the people of the state, they were also urged into activity by the women of the Soldiers Home Association, who visited nearly every portion of the entire state of Wisconsin for this purpose. As a result, the Soldiers Home Fair Societies were formed in large and small homes all across Wisconsin, for the sole purpose of getting money and contributions for the fair. The effort to make money for the fair resulted in all kinds of entertainments, such as festivals, picnics, tableaux, concerts, and dramatic entertainments. Things were progressing nicely in Milwaukee as well, as the ladies had secured $10,000 with the promise of large contributions yet to come for the entertainments and tables at the fair. Donations of all kinds were received by the ladies, including even a piece of towel that had been used to bind Lincoln's head after he was shot. In the meantime, the fair building was constructed with donated building materials with a frontage of 300 feet long and 100 feet wide on Main Street, which today is North Broadway in the 3rd Ward, with a floral temple at its center. The interior of the building was decorated with evergreens, flowers, and bunting. The fair really had something for everyone, including a dining hall that seated 1,500 people at a time, with meals cooked by local women and gas jets illuminated the building at night. The scope of the fair was very wide, as contributions had been solicited from every state in the Union as well as from prominent Americans living abroad, and it truly did offer something for everyone. Every department of commerce, industry, and agriculture was represented. Visitors could buy tickets for a chance to own the latest in technology, get information on the best crops and tools, and concerts were held daily. Trophies of war, including captured rebel flags, were exhibited by several Wisconsin regiments. Easily the most popular exhibit of all was Old Abe, the war eagle of the 8th Wisconsin. He drew such huge crowds every day that he easily became tired and had to be taken away for regular rests. A few lucky people won feathers that fell from his tail, while others could purchase a card with his photo on it, and if he was in the mood, he might autograph it by either biting it or scratching it with one of his talons, as you see in the photo on the screen. Evening entertainments of all sorts attracted sightseers. The fair ran for 2 weeks from June 28th to July 12th, 1865, and it proved to be a greater success than was anticipated. Nearly $140,000 had been raised, and after all expenses were paid and the lumber of the building sold, the ladies found that they had $110,000, which would be just around $2 million today, to build a permanent soldiers' home. And with that success assured, they purchased a lot for $10,000 on which the future Wisconsin home for disabled soldiers could be built. But meanwhile, things are happening in Washington. On March 3rd, 1865, after a lengthy debate in Congress on the need for veteran care, President Lincoln signed the National Asylum for Disabled Soldiers Act, which provided for a U.S. government-sanctioned and run central asylum with 3 branches. The next day, he delivered his second inaugural speech, which included the phrase that remains the motto of the VA healthcare systems today: to care for him who shall have borne the battle and for his widow and orphan. May 16, 1866 was the date of the first meeting of the National Board of Managers of the National Asylum for Disabled Volunteer Soldiers, and site selection for the first 3 homes began. Togus, Maine was chosen as the first site because it had been the site of a large failed resort, so the buildings were already there, including 134 rooms that could immediately be used for housing. A committee of prominent Milwaukee businessmen, led by Dr. Erastus Wilcott, a prominent physician who had served as Wisconsin's Surgeon General during the war, was authorized, and they persuaded the women to turn over their money and property to the U.S. government in exchange for locating one of the proposed national homes in Milwaukee. Many of the women, no surprise, felt that it would be a betrayal of trust to turn their hard-earned profits over to the government. But when it was finally put to a vote, one quiet woman suggested that the matter should not be decided by sentiment. And she set forth that most of their money would be needed for the proposed building, and it would mean a constant struggle for years to come to provide for its maintenance and a tax upon the energies of more than a generation of Milwaukee women. She added that a national home would be of great value to the city of Milwaukee, and in the end, Wisconsin soldiers would be better cared for under government rather than private auspices. So the association membership voted to accept the government's proposal and merge their home in with a national one. But the latest stipulation to the federal government included one small but very important phrase. They insisted that the doors be open to veterans of all wars and not just those who had served in the Civil War. Lydia Hewitt was appointed to the local committee to choose the site of the home, and in March 1867, the Board of Managers selected property, which at that time was 3 miles west of downtown Milwaukee, and it had been farms owned by several prominent Milwaukee families, including John Mitchell, the son of Alexander and Martha Mitchell. The land covered 425 acres and cost approximately $75,000. The home's only admission requirements were proof of an honorable discharge from the military and medical testimony that rendered the soldier unable to earn a living by ordinary means. In May 1867, 60 soldiers were moved from the downtown location into existing farm buildings that were on the property. In July, work began on the first permanent building on the grounds, a rectangular building veneered with Milwaukee brick. It was completed in just 6 weeks and provided housing for the soldiers until the first domiciliary, Old Main, could be finished. Old Main was completed in 1869, designed by the famous Milwaukee architect Edward Townsend Mix. It was considered the finest of all the buildings on the campus and originally had a 500-bed capacity, but it quickly became overcrowded. By the late 1800s, it served as the living quarters for nearly 1,000 veterans. The end towers were added in 1876, and the 4 corner towers still retain their original iron cresting. Old Main was a domiciliary for patient and living care, and it was meant to hold all the functions of the Soldiers Home, including administrative offices. The building included a dispensary, matron's room, library, chapel, surgeon's room, and sitting room for residents. Sleeping areas on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors were dorm-like rooms with common gathering spaces. The main dining room could hold up to 1,000 residents at a time. The construction boom of new buildings in the late 1800s included a hospital, library, chapel, firehouse, theater, and more. Many of these original buildings were designated a National Historic Landmark in 2011. The current 10-story building was opened in 1866, and with 1,000 beds, it was one of the largest of all the VA hospitals. It was named after Milwaukee Congressman Clement J. Zablocki in 1984. Nearly the entire hospital has been modernized on every floor over the past few years. Old Main housed residents until 1869, when residents were moved to the newly remodeled hospital annex, and it quickly fell into a state of disrepair. Now, the Soldiers' Home was meant to bring veterans together as a community, but also to bring community to the veterans. Constructed in 1881, the Ward Memorial Hall served that purpose. The intent was to provide the home's members with cultural activities and concerts. Theatrical performances, lectures, and films were shown there, allowing them to socialize, relax, and enjoy recreational time with each other. It was originally a multi-purpose building with a flat-floored hall, serving as a theater, amusement hall, restaurant, home store, post office, and place of worship. At one point, it even housed veterans when membership exceeded space in the barracks. During an 1898 renovation, the hall was rebuilt to its present configuration, as you can see here, with balconies, a sloped floor, new seats, and an orchestra pit, and was used solely as a theater. In the late 1920s and 1930s, additional enhancements were made for showing of motion pictures. Performances at the hall were often donated by the performers or were paid for from the post funds, allowing the soldiers to attend for free. One of the most spectacular features of the Ward Memorial Hall is the large stained glass portrait of General Ulysses S. Grant on horseback. It was a gift from the people of St. Louis in 1887 to the city of Milwaukee following the 1887 national encampment that was held here in Milwaukee. Part of the recuperation offered on the grounds was spiritual health, and the chapel aided veterans in spiritual healing. Designed by famous Milwaukee architect Henry Koch, it was built in 1889, and it held services there until 1989, when it too fell into a state of horrible disrepair. While there are many other buildings on the ground worth mentioning, my time here is short, so the last I will talk about is the Governor's Mansion. Built in 1868, it's the oldest building remaining on campus. The residence was built for the Soldiers Home director, who at that time was referred to as governor. The mansion, the design is attributed again to Edward Townsend Mix, the same architect who designed Old Main. Today, the Governor's Mansion is vacant and also in desperate need of renovation. But there is good news to report. Old Main has been beautifully restored. The project brought together multiple government agencies, private businesses, nonprofits, community groups, veterans groups, philanthropic foundations, and thousands of individual visionaries and contributors working together. The Milwaukee Preservation Alliance successfully nominated the campus to the National Trust for Historic Preservation's 11 Most Endangered list, eventually leading to the coveted designation of National Historic Landmark in 2011. With restoration complete, Old Main now has 70 one-bedroom and 10 two-bedroom units for veterans at risk of becoming homeless. There are 11 units in a separate and secure wing that are designated for women. What many said was impossible was complete, and veterans once again call Old Main home. And I'm pleased to announce that approval has been given and work will soon begin on the Ward Theater, the Historic Chapel, and the Governor's Mansion. The Ward Theater will host community theater and musical groups and offer a venue for conferences and lectures for VA medical staff. The Soldiers Home Chapel will be a non-denominational worship space and conference space for training and mental health, and it will also be able to be used for weddings and funerals. The Governor's residence will hold offices for supportive services providers, as well as a technological training center to provide computer literacy training for veterans. The Alexander Company is overseeing the project, and these were the same folks that did the renovation at Old Main. So, the vision of a soldier's home that those ladies of Wisconsin, of the Wisconsin Soldiers Home Association had so long ago still lives on. But what became of them? Fanny Burling Buttrick had one daughter, Minnie, who died in infancy in 1867. Fanny's up on the upper left. Her husband, Edwin Lorenzo, served as lieutenant colonel in the 24th Wisconsin and colonel of the 39th Wisconsin during the Civil War. The Buttricks lived in Chicago from 1868 to 1871, where Buttrick worked for the Northwestern Liquid Fuel Company. Sadly, Fanny died in 1871, and she is buried at the historic Forest Home Cemetery next to her infant daughter, Minnie. Hannah Vetter went on to become one of the founders of the Wisconsin Industrial School for Girls, a 19th century American reform school in Milwaukee. The Wisconsin Industrial School for Girls opened in 1875 and was the only secular reformatory institution in the state where delinquent and neglected girls could make a home. The school's purpose was the prevention of crime and pauperism of unfortunate girls and the restoration of those who had fallen into bad habits or inherited vicious tendencies. The system of discipline and education was adapted to the conditions and needs of each pupil. Hannah died in 1910 and is also buried at Forest Home Cemetery. Lydia Hewitt was also involved in several other charities during the war, one of which ran the city's first two orphanages. Lydia had grown up in an educated family and traveled throughout Europe as an artist. Two of her works of art are still on display today at the Museum of Wisconsin Artists in West Bend. She also exhibited her work at the Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia in 1876. She inspired and fostered an intelligent appreciation of art in Milwaukee and was responsible for the art exposition at the Soldiers Home Fair. In 1885, she received approval for a Civil War monument from Milwaukee's Chamber of Commerce. To raise money for the monument, she solicited autographs of famous Americans in government, science, art, and literature, and had them compiled into a giant autograph book, 2 feet wide and 2 feet thick. There were over 2,000 signatures. Sculptor John Conway's The Victorious Charge was sketched on the title page. When it was completed, she put the book up for auction, and it went to Captain Frederick Pabst, the city's most prominent brewer, at a price of over $2,000 to complete fundraising. The book remains at the Pabst Mansion today. The monument was unveiled in 1898 in front of the Milwaukee Public Library, where it still stands today. Martha Reed Mitchell was an American philanthropist and socialite, well known in charity, art, and social circles in the U.S. and abroad. In 1841, she married Alexander Mitchell, one of the sturdy pioneers of Wisconsin, and later one of the most prominent men in the state. While her husband amassed great wealth, neither prosperity or popularity deprived Mrs. Mitchell of her simple manner and her love and interest in the cause of the less fortunate. Besides serving as an officer with the West Side Soldiers Aid Society and the Wisconsin Soldiers Home Association, she also organized the Protestant Orphan Asylum of Milwaukee and served as its first treasurer. She supported a mission kindergarten with nearly 100 children. Milwaukee art and artists were indebted to Mitchell for her liberal patronage. After the Civil War and the death of her husband, Alexander, she established a home near Jacksonville, Florida, where she became interested in charities in Florida and was one of the first vice regents of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. She also played a huge role in raising her grandson, the famous World War I ace, Billy Mitchell, who's also known as the father of the Air Force. Martha Mitchell died at her home near Jacksonville, Florida, February 15th, 1982, at 84 years, and she is buried at the historic Nicholas Cemetery in Jacksonville, Florida. And that is the end of my story, but I would like to urge you all to follow Milwaukee Preservation Alliance. By either the website is given there, or their Facebook page, their Instagram page, or their Twitter page for updates on the renovations that are going on at the Soldiers Home. And please, I know some of you already have, come and take a tour of the Soldiers Home that is offered every Saturday, starting May 11th to October 26th. I will do a walking tour of the historic district, and you'll get to have a good look at the inside of Old Main and see some of those renovations. I myself serve as one of the tour guides there, so please come and take a tour with us. And, okay, well, thank you very much.